The dashcam footage didn't just end one man's career. It tore open a machine that had been running in the dark for 22 years, grinding people down quietly. One traffic stop at a time on a stretch of Louisiana highway where the street lights were broken and nobody who mattered was watching, and it did it in a single night because one man looked at the wrong woman and decided, as he had decided 100 times before, that she had nobody coming for her. He was wrong about that in a way that is going to take a while to fully explain. It was August in Louisiana, and the air on Highway 31 that night had the kind of weight to it that makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet cloth, thick and warm and pressing down on everything, the kind of heat that doesn't break at sundown but just changes character, less bright, equally relentless. The pine trees on both sides of the road stood completely still because there was no wind and hadn't been one since morning, and the only thing moving in the world seemed to be the headlights of a charcoal gray Chevy Tahoe cutting south through the dark at a calm, careful 53 miles per hour. Inside that Tahoe, Special Agent Dominique Reeves had a can of sparkling water wedged between her knees. Miles Davis playing low through the speakers. Kind of Blue, the album she put on when she needed the world to slow down and stop asking things of her, and her left arm resting on the door with her fingers trailing in the warm air outside, feeling the night move past her hand, the way you feel water move past your hand when you drag it off the side of a boat. She was 38 years old. She had worked 14 hours that day and would have been the first to tell you that her back hurt and her eyes were dry, and the conference in New Orleans had run 2 hours longer than anyone had planned, because nobody in a room full of federal law enforcement agents is ever willing to be the first person to say they're done for the night. She was not wearing her FBI windbreaker. It was folded on the back seat. And tonight, she was just a woman in dark jeans and a black hoodie with the cuffs pushed up, driving the long way home, because Highway 31 was empty and empty after 14 hours of noise, and people felt like a gift she had not expected to receive. On the passenger seat beside her sat a manila folder, closed a strip of tape across the front edge where she had written in her own handwriting, "Case number 9-17 Monroe L." She had been meaning to review it on the drive. She had meant to open it an hour ago, but the music was right and the road was quiet and the sparkling water was cold, and sometimes you just give yourself an hour before you reach for the next thing. Dominique Reeves had taken down trafficking networks in Miami. She had walked into a room in Washington, D.C., with a man who had 3 hostages and a list of demands, and had walked back out 11 hours later with everyone alive. She was by any honest accounting one of the most capable people working in the Southeast Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and she knew it the way you know a thing you have earned over a long time, not with arrogance, but with the quiet, settled certainty her mother used to call knowing the ground beneath your feet. To the particular kind of eye that was about to find her on this road, though, none of that was visible. What was visible was a black woman alone driving a $52,000 truck late at night on a 2-lane highway in the Louisiana dark. She reached for the sparkling water and took a long drink and glanced at the speedometer 53. 2 under the limit, and looked back at the road. And that was the last moment of the evening that belonged entirely to her, because that was the moment the interior of her car exploded with blue and red light. She sighed. The sound came out flat and sharp, the specific sound of someone who is not surprised and is not afraid, but is already very tired of what is about to happen. Because she had been through versions of this moment before. Had been through it more times than she could count, and she knew its rhythms the way you know the rhythms of something that has been done to you repeatedly since before you were old enough to understand why. She checked the speedometer one more time. She signaled. She slowed. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder with the careful, deliberate compliance of a person who has been taught from a very young age that how you behave in the first 30 seconds is the only thing you can fully control. The small red recording light on the dashcam unit blinked in the corner of the windshield. It had been blinking since New Orleans. The gravel announced her the way gravel always does, loud grinding making a production of the moment, the way the situation did not require. And then the patrol car's spotlight swung forward and hit her side mirror and flooded the Tahoe's interior with a white so complete and sudden that it briefly erased everything in it. The kind of light designed to make a person feel caught, exposed, like something pulled up into the open from wherever it had been hiding. Dominique didn't flinch. She placed both hands flat on the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread, palms down and visible. She lowered the window and watched in the side mirror as the silhouette of the officer came toward her, big, broad-shouldered, walking with a particular quality of stride that she recognized immediately, and that her body registered before her conscious mind had fully named it the walk of a man who is not coming to help you, but to show you something, the walk of someone who has already run the scenario in his head and liked the way it ended. His hand was on the grip of his holstered weapon before he reached her window. The name tag on his uniform read, Branson. Mid-40s white, a face that the Louisiana sun and 20 years of deciding things had treated in a specific way, weathered down to something that looked like it had never been soft, the jaw carrying a permanent clench. The kind of face that has forgotten how to look neutral because neutral stopped being necessary a long time ago. His eyes moved through the interior of the car the way the eyes move when they are looking for something to use. Backseat glove. Box center console. Her hands and they moved past her face the first time. Without stopping, as if her face were a detail that came after the useful information. License and registration. The voice had no greeting in it. It had the flat, practiced sound of a man who removed courtesy from his traffic stop so long ago he no longer remembers it was ever there. "Good evening, Officer Dominique," said in the calm, polite, carefully modulated voice that her parents had taught her at 12 years old and that she had been using in moments like this one for 26 years, since the voice that is not submission, is not fear, is a specific and deliberate tool for keeping herself on the ground she is standing on. "I'm going to reach for my purse on the passenger seat to get my ID. Is that all right?" Branson leaned in closer instead of answering, and the smell came with him. Stale cigarettes and spearmint gum, a combination that her body registered as a warning before her brain finished processing it, the specific mix of someone who is trying to cover something and not quite succeeding. His gaze went from the glove box to the back seat to the folder on the passenger seat and then finally to her face. And when it reached her face, it had already decided, something was already wearing the conclusion it had formed before it arrived. "Whose car is this?" he said. She told him it was hers. "This is a $50,000 truck," he said. And the way he said it, not as a question, as a statement of something that didn't add up, carried everything it was intended to carry. "What are you, some kind of rapper's girlfriend?" "Borrowing somebody's ride." He said it conversationally. Not loud, not heated. The way you comment on the weather when you are comfortable in any weather. The ease of a man who has said things like this to people like her on this road before, and has never once been required to answer for it. That ease was the thing. Not the words which were ugly enough, but the ease underneath them, the absolute unconsidered comfort of a man who has been doing this for so long that he no longer notices he is doing it the way you stop noticing the sound of a fan that has been running in the same room for years. She did not let any of that show in her face. "My name is Dominique Reeves," she said levelly. "I am the registered owner. If you run the plates, you'll see that. I'll run what I want when I want." Branson said, "Right now I'm talking to you. Step out of the vehicle." There are places in this country where the machinery of law enforcement has been allowed to operate without real oversight for so long that the people running it have confused the absence of consequences with the possession of rights, where the badge stopped being a symbol of something and became the thing itself, where accountability became theoretical. The way rain is theoretical in a drought, something that exists in the world, just not here, just not for a Calhoun Parish, Louisiana was one of those places. Sheriff Dale Pruitt had been elected to his office for the first time 22 years ago, and in those 22 years he had been re-elected 4 times, which sounds like democracy. Until you understand that in a county where the sheriff controls which investigations happen and which ones get filed in a drawer, where the county judge has teed off with you every Saturday for a decade, and where the local paper's editor-in-chief got his drunk driving charge quietly reduced to a parking violation 6 years ago, in a county like that, re-election is less a vote than a formality, a ritual everyone performs because the alternative is explaining why they stopped. Deputy Kyle Branson had worked in this parish for 11 years, and in those 11 years had been the subject of 6 formal complaints, 2 internal affairs inquiries, and 1 use of force review. Not one of those things had produced a consequence he felt for longer than a week. The complaints dissolved. The inquiries closed. The use of force review concluded that the force had been reasonable, which it concluded in 4 days, which is fast for a process that is supposed to take 60. Branson knew what that meant. Had always known. It meant the roof was holding. It meant the right people were keeping the right things in the right drawers, and he didn't have to do anything differently, and he didn't. Back on the shoulder of Highway 31, Branson leaned against the doorframe of the Tahoe and looked at Dominique the way a man looks at a situation he has complete authority over. Which is to say, he didn't look at it carefully at all, because when you have never been required to look carefully at anything, careful looking is the first skill you lose. "I pulled you over because you were swerving," he said. "Crossed the double yellow back there. Suspicion of DUI. I need you to step out of the vehicle for a field sobriety assessment." "I haven't been drinking," Dominique said, "and I did not cross the center line. I have a dash cam that records front and rear telemetry, and it will confirm I maintained my lane the entire length of the highway tonight." Branson's eyes moved to the windshield, a quick flick, involuntary, the kind of eye movement the body makes before the brain decides whether it wants to, and found the small black lens of the dashcam unit mounted behind the rearview mirror. He looked at it for 1 second. 2. Then, something in his face did what faces do when a man has decided that being challenged is worse than being wrong, and the irritation that moved across his expression was not the irritation of someone caught in something, but of someone who does not accept the premise that anything he does can be caught. The camera didn't scare him. It offended him. "My name is Dominique Reeves," she said, and her voice shifted into the register she used when she needed something to land and stay there. Not loud, not aggressive, but carrying the specific weight of something that is true and that she intends to be heard. "I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Southeast Division, badge number 7731. My supervisor is ASAC Marcus Webb Atlanta Field Office." Branson stared at her. Then he looked out at the empty highway with the expression of a man sharing a private joke with no one in particular, and made a short sound through his nose that was not quite a laugh, but contained everything a laugh contains. "Right," he said. "And I'm the King of England." He said it lightly, pleasantly almost. The way you say something you have said before to someone who tried the same move before, and it did not work then either. What happened over the next several minutes was not confusion, and it was not miscommunication, and it was not 2 people who simply got off on the wrong foot and couldn't find their way back. It was a man working a method he had used many times on this road. Following steps he had walked so often, they had grooved themselves into his muscle memory, doing what he always did, because what he always did had always worked. He told her again to step out. She declined calmly and explained that she was a federal agent carrying a concealed weapon, and that stepping out onto a dark highway shoulder for an officer who had refused to acknowledge her credentials was not something her training permitted her to do. He told her she was non-compliant. She said she was careful. He said she had been swerving. She said the camera would show otherwise. He looked at the camera again, that same quick flick, and this time what came back into his face after it was something she had not seen in the first few minutes, something that was less like irritation and more like appetite. The expression of a man who has just been reminded that the recording equipment in the car is going to capture whatever happens next and has decided that this is not a problem, but a kind of dare. "I know how this goes," he said, and his voice had dropped a register, taken on a quality that was almost conversational, almost friendly. The tone of someone explaining something patiently to someone who has not yet understood. "You people always have a story. FBI badge, military ID, county. Commissioner's daughter. I've heard them all. Every time somebody on this road doesn't want to cooperate, suddenly they've got some kind of card to play." He made a small dismissive sound. "Save it for the judge, sweetheart." And then his hand moved to the door handle. "Officer Branson," she said, and the voice she used was the one she had used in the hostage situation in the warehouse in Miami at 3 in the morning, when the wrong word would have ended things in a way they could not be ended back. The voice that is not raised because it does not need to be raised. It goes to the place it needs to go on its own because of what it is. "I am a federal officer. If you open this door without cause, you are assaulting a federal agent. I need you to hear that clearly." "Last warning," Branson said. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. The sound was small and hard and specific, the snap of leather releasing from the catch, the sound of a decision that has been made, and she heard it the way she heard things in rooms where everything mattered completely, with her full attention, the rest of the world briefly set aside. She ran the calculation. She had run it before in other situations with different variables, but the core of it was always the same. What are the likely outcomes of each available path, and which one gives the best chance of everyone going home? If she stepped out, he would see the Glock on her right hip. A man already primed for aggression, already certain she was lying about everything, would not respond to the sight of a weapon on a woman he had decided was nobody with calm and protocol. She had read enough case files. She knew how that sentence ended. The files were written in the specific, careful language of people documenting something terrible that had already happened, and she was not going to become one of those files. She was not going to get out of the car. "Officer Branson," she said one final time, enunciating every word with the clarity of something being spoken for a record, because it was being spoken for a record. "I am Special Agent Dominique Reeves, FBI Southeast Division, badge number 7731. My supervisor is ASAC Marcus Webb, Atlanta Direct Line 4045550917. I am telling you this for the last time. Please hear it." Branson ripped the door handle open. She braced her feet against the footwell and held her position, not striking, not resisting in any way that would read as resistance, because she needed the camera behind the rearview mirror to record everything without ambiguity, needed every inch of this to be so clear and so complete that no one in any jurisdiction, no internal affairs investigator with a friendship to protect, no sheriff with a golf schedule to maintain could watch the footage later and locate a gray area. And Branson grabbed her left arm with a grip that was not about restraint, but about force. Fingers closing hard enough that she felt the pressure in the bone, and she felt the door pull away from her, and felt the rain come in cold and sideways against her face, and she held. "Get out of the vehicle!" he screamed, and his voice had the pitch and the fragmentation of a man who has crossed into a place past reason, past calculation, operating now on something older and simpler than thought. "Get out, or I will drag you out. I swear to God." He let go of her arm, stepped back. His hand flew to his hip, and in one motion that took less than a second, and that she watched with the granular, slowed-down attention that comes when the body understands what is about to happen before the mind has finished processing it. Deputy Kyle Branson drew his service weapon and leveled the barrel at the center of her chest, and his face in the white light of the car's interior wore an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not rage, which she had expected, but something worse than rage, something that had no heat in it at all. The calm, settled look of a man who has done this before, or gotten close enough to doing it, that the gap no longer feels like a gap. Time did not stop. That is the thing nobody tells you, and that the movies get wrong every single time. Time does not stop. It does not slow down into some merciful suspension that gives you extra space to think. What happens is the opposite. Time stays exactly as fast as it always is, and your brain speeds up to meet it. And the result is that you perceive more of it, catch more details in the same interval, the way a high-speed camera catches motion that the naked eye misses, not because the motion has slowed, but because the shutter has quickened. She saw the scratch on the slide of his weapon, a long diagonal groove, the kind left by repeated fast draws from a holster in a confined space. The mark of a gun that had been pulled out and put back many, many times by a man who practiced the motion or simply performed it often enough that practice was redundant. She saw his pupils blown wide open, the irises almost gone, the specific dilation that belongs to adrenaline and to something else she recognized from the faces of men she had arrested who had enjoyed what they were doing. Not fear, not even the controlled aggression of someone responding to a threat. Something that sat closer to excitement than either of those things, the physiological signature of a man in a moment he had been building toward. She saw the steadiness of his hands. That was the detail that told her everything she needed to know about how many times he had been here before they were not shaking. A man who had never pointed a loaded weapon at another human being at close range has shaking hands. The hands of a man who is doing this for the first time or the second tremble with the weight of what the moment means. Branson's hands were steady the way the hands of someone performing a familiar task are steady. The steadiness of repetition, of comfort, of a man who had gotten close enough to this on enough dark nights on this highway that the act no longer carried the weight it should have carried. "Hands up," he said, and his voice was tight but controlled. "Get them up. Kick the door open and get on the ground, face down. Now." "My hands are up," Dominique said. She said it the way you say something true in a room where everything depends on what is true being heard, not loud, not trembling, not the voice of a woman who is afraid because fear and the awareness of danger are two different things, and she had learned the difference years ago. She said it with the specific calm of a woman who is thinking 3 steps ahead of the moment she is currently in and who needs the man pointing the gun at her to be the loudest thing in the room so that the camera behind the rearview mirror can record every syllable. "Look at my hands, Deputy Branson. Both of them, palms out. I am not reaching for anything. Ground. Now." She did not move. She had run the calculation before he finished saying the word, and the answer had not changed from the last time she ran it. The ground led to cuffs. Cuffs led to the weapon on her hip. The weapon on her hip in this man's hands in this moment led somewhere she could see clearly in the files she had read in the language of reports that explained why a woman was not alive anymore. With words like "suspect reached for" and "officer feared for his life." Language designed to close a door that should never have been opened. She stayed. "I am Special Agent Dominique Reeves," she said. "FBI Southeast Division badge number 7731. My supervisor is ASAC Marcus Webb, Atlanta. My badge is in my purse on the passenger seat. I am going to move my left hand, only my left hand slowly to retrieve it. My right hand does not move. You keep your weapon on me. If I reach for anything else, you do what you need to do. But look at the badge first." Branson's jaw worked. He licked his lips, looked up and down the highway, empty in both directions, the nearest light a dying flicker a quarter-mile north. He was doing his own calculation, and she could see it happening, could read the variables moving across his face. The road was empty. The night was dark. The body cam he'd turned off 30 minutes before the stop was still off, and the only camera that was running was the one inside her car, which he had already decided he wasn't worried about. "Slow," he said. She moved her left hand with the theatrical deliberateness of someone who understands that every millimeter of this motion is going to be examined and who intends for it to be unambiguous. One finger hooked around the strap of her leather tote dragged across the console. Flap opened, and there, right on top exactly where she had told him it would be, was the gold shield in its holder with the photo ID and laminate beside it. The bold blue letters reading Federal Bureau of Investigation catching the car's interior light and holding it. She turned it toward him. The gold caught. It shone, clean and bright against the dark interior of the car, against the rain, against everything unmistakable, official, real. Branson squinted, leaned in, gun still up. He saw the seal. He saw the photo. He looked at the badge and then at her face and then at the badge again. And then, in the moment that would define the rest of his life, whether he understood it in the moment or not, the calculation in his face completed itself. And what came out the other side was not doubt, and it was not fear, and it was not the reasonable response of a man who has just understood that he has made a serious mistake and should find a way to walk it back before it gets worse. What came out was contempt. He holstered the weapon, and he smiled, not the angry smile of before, but something worse, a slow, almost impressed smile, the smile of a man who has just seen a trick he didn't expect and has decided to find it amusing rather than allow it to matter. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, crossing his arms against her doorframe, leaning in like they were having a neighborly conversation over a back fence. "You actually went and had one made. Where do you even get something like that? That's real cute. That's impressive, actually. I'll give you that." She stared at him. "Excuse me? You heard me?" He looked at the badge again, tilted his head like he was admiring the craftsmanship. "I've seen these before. Little online shops, prop houses, some of them are real good. Real convincing." He looked back at her. "But honey, flashing tin at me doesn't change what you are. You're a civilian on my highway, and you are in a lot of trouble." He reached for his radio. And something in Dominique Reeves went perfectly, absolutely still. Not the stillness of fear. The stillness of the storm's eye, the place in the center of a system where the air is clear and calm and everything is decided. He was calling it in. He was going on the record. He was confirming the stop, the subject, the badge, and his intention to arrest on a departmental frequency that was already being recorded. He had just sealed his own fate in his own voice, and he had done it with a smile on his face, and he didn't know. Dominique slowly lowered her hands and reached for her phone. "Who you calling?" Branson said, and there was still the smile in it, the lazy certainty of a man who has assessed every person in this situation and ranked himself correctly at the top. "Your lawyer." "That's fine. You're gonna need one." He leaned against her doorframe and watched her reach for the phone. The way you watch someone do something that isn't going to change anything, with the comfortable patience of a man who has nowhere to be and nothing to fear. The phone was already connected to the car's Bluetooth. She had set it up in the parking garage in New Orleans before she pulled out, the way she always did, because driving in unfamiliar territory at night alone was the kind of situation her training had opinions about. She pressed a number that did not appear in her recent calls list because it was not a number you called for ordinary reasons. She had it memorized the way she had everything memorized that might someday matter, because someday had a habit of arriving without warning. It rang once. The voice that came through the car's speakers filled the cabin, the way voices fill spaces they are designed to fill, flat, alert, completely awake in the specific way that people in tactical operations centers are always awake, which is to say, awake like a machine continuously and without interruption. "Reeves, this is Atlanta Tactical Dispatch. Your panic beacon activated 14 minutes ago. Confirm status." Branson's smile stopped. Not quickly. It took a moment. The way certainty takes a moment to come undone, when it has been built up over years, the slow withdrawal of an expression that does not want to believe what it is hearing. He looked at the phone in the cup holder, then at the speakers, then at Dominique, and for the first time since he had walked up to her window, his face contained something new, the beginning of a question. "Agent in distress," Dominique said, and her voice was the same instrument it had been throughout, steady, precise, doing its job. And she kept her eyes on Branson's face while she spoke, because she had earned the right to watch this and she was going to watch it. "Armed hostile at my vehicle window. Local law enforcement Deputy Kyle Branson, Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department. He has drawn his service weapon on me. He has refused federal credentials twice. He has attempted unlawful detention. GPS is active and confirmed. I am requesting immediate assistance." "Copy that, Agent Reeves." The voice on the line was already doing several things at once. She could hear the other sounds in the background. Keyboards. Another voice reading coordinates the organized, controlled urgency of a room that has switched into a different mode. "We have your location. Tactical team is redirecting from the I-10 operation. Now they are minutes out. Chopper is already airborne. Highway 31 is being locked down in both directions. Do not engage unless fired upon. We're coming." The line stayed open. Branson was looking at the radio in his hand, the radio he had used 2 minutes ago to tell his entire department that he was arresting a woman with a fake federal badge. He looked at the sky above the tree line. The night was making a new sound. It started as something you felt more than heard, a low rhythmic pressure in the air, the kind of thing that arrives in the chest before the ears fully register it, and then it grew methodically with a consistency that ruled out thunder, that ruled out traffic, that ruled out everything except the specific mechanical heartbeat of a helicopter moving fast and low over the Louisiana pines. Thump, 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 growing closer. Unhurried in its closeness because it did not need to hurry. It was already where it needed to be, and it was only getting more so. Dominique let the sound sit in the air for 3 full seconds. Then she said quietly in the same gentle tone a teacher uses when the lesson has finally landed, "You hear that, Deputy? That's not eBay." What happened to Branson's face in the seconds that followed was a thing she had seen exactly once before in her career in a federal building in Atlanta, when a man who had spent years believing he was the most protected person in any room he entered looked at the evidence arranged on the table in front of him and understood for the first time that the protection was gone, and had been gone for longer than he knew. The red drained out of his face. What came up underneath it was a gray-green pallor, the color of a man whose body has received information that his brain has not finished processing. He looked at the radio he had just used to announce himself. He looked at the phone in the cup holder of a car that was connected to a tactical operations center that had his GPS coordinates. He looked at the sky. The thumping was no longer something you felt, it was something that occupied the air around you, that had mass and dimension that was coming down. The sound of a helicopter at close range is not simply a noise. It is a physical event, something that moves through the air and into the body and bypasses the ears entirely, communicating directly to the part of the nervous system that has no language but only response. And what it communicates with absolute clarity is this: something much larger than you has arrived, and it did not come to negotiate. The Bell 429 came in over the tree line to the north, low and fast, and when it swung into position over Highway 31, the rotor wash hit everything below it, like a fist rain that had been falling straight down was suddenly flying sideways, horizontal sheets of it, whipping at every surface with a violence that felt personal, and the pines on both shoulders of the road bent away from the force in one long, continuous shudder, like a crowd stepping back from something they don't want to be near. The spotlight came down from the helicopter's belly like a second sun being applied to a very small, very specific target. It found Deputy Kyle Branson, and it did not lose him. He could not look up. He could not step sideways. He tried once, one step to the left, and the column of light moved with him, with the patient precision of a machine that has been programmed to keep exactly one thing illuminated and that has no capacity for fatigue or distraction or mercy. He stood in it with rain coming at him horizontally, and the roar of the rotor filling his skull so completely that thought was something that had to happen in the spaces between beats, and he looked for the first time in 11 years of doing whatever he wanted on this road, like what he actually was, a man standing in the open with nowhere to put himself. Then the ground units came around the bend. No sirens, not a single flashing light beyond what the operation required. They came with speed and the cold, efficient precision of people who have done this in parking lots and industrial districts and on stretches of empty highway in the dark, and who are interested in exactly one thing, which is completing the task correctly and going home. 4 black Chevrolet Suburbans came around the southern curve in tight formation engines, full tires throwing water, and they split in the last 100 feet, 2 sweeping wide to seal off Branson's patrol car from behind, 2 pulling forward to box in Dominique's Tahoe. And the formation they completed, when the vehicles stopped, was so precise it looked designed, which it was a tactical seal that closed the scene from every direction simultaneously. Doors opened before the Suburbans had fully stopped moving. Agents hit the ground in tactical gear plate carriers, ballistic helmets, boots, weapons, up voices overlapping in the controlled, rehearsed cacophony of a unit that has run this drill. Until the drill runs itself. Federal agents drop the radio hands on your head, do it now, hands up, do not move. And the letters FBI blazed from their backs and chests in reflective yellow that the spotlight caught and threw back at everything around it like a second announcement. Branson stumbled backward. His boots hit the soft mud at the edge of the gravel shoulder and went out from under him, and he went down to one knee, and he did not get back up. Voluntarily. His legs had received information from the situation that his brain was still catching up to, and his legs had made the sensible decision, and he was kneeling in the mud of the Highway 31 shoulder with his hands half raised and the green dot of a laser sight sitting on his chest with a stillness that was in its own way the most frightening thing on the road. "I'm a cop," he said, and his voice had gone thin and high against the rotor noise, a thread of sound trying to carry more weight than it had been built for. "I'm Calhoun Parrish. I'm a sworn officer of this county. You've got the wrong—" "On the ground," the nearest agent said in a voice that had no anger in it and no urgency, just the flat statement of something that was going to happen. "Ground. Now hands behind your back." He went down. His chest hit the gravel and the stones bit into him through the uniform fabric, and 2 agents came down on him simultaneously, a knee in his lower back that drove the air out of his lungs in a sound he had never made before, a sound that had no dignity in it, a sound that was purely involuntary, and his wrists were pulled behind him with the brisk, efficient grip of people who have done this to many people and regard it as a mechanical problem rather than a personal one. And then he heard it. The handcuffs, the ratchet advancing one tooth at a time. Click, click, click. Kyle Branson had heard that sound more times than he could count over 11 years. He had heard it in parking lots and on roadsides and in the booking rooms of the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department, and every single time he had heard it, it was the sound of winning. The sound of the world confirming the arrangement he had built his life around. The sound of power demonstrating itself, the sound of an ending that he had authored. Lying with his face in the gravel of Highway 31, with the rain coming sideways, and the smell of mud and motor oil in his nose, and the cold steel advancing around both wrists, the sound was the same sound. Same mechanical process, same metal, same ratchet. But from this angle, it sounded like a door being locked from the outside. The helicopter pulled up to a holding pattern, and the roar dropped to a steady thrum, and in the relative quiet that followed the lead. Suburban's passenger door opened, and a tall man in a suit jacket and FBI windbreaker stepped out and walked toward the Tahoe with the unhurried, undeflectable purpose of a man who has been interrupted at dinner by news about someone in his care and who has come to see about it in person. ASAC. Marcus Webb did not run. He didn't need to. He walked past Branson the way you walk past something on the sidewalk that does not require your attention, and went directly to Dominique's door. She stepped out, phone still in hand. Weapon-holstered hoodie smoothed down, and looked at him with the specific expression of a woman who is very tired and entirely intact. "You okay, Domi?" "I'm good, Marcus." She looked back at Branson, who was trying to lift his face from the gravel to see what was happening. He didn't breach the vehicle, but he drew on me, full intent, refused credentials twice, both times clearly on camera. Webb turned and looked at Branson with the expression of a man who has seen this specific thing one too many times and has run out of whatever it takes to be surprised by it. "Get him up," he said. The agents pulled Branson to his feet, and he came up dripping mud streaked from his collar to his belt uniform, so far from the authority it was supposed to project that it barely registered as a uniform, just wet fabric on a wet man who was taking inventory of every exit that was no longer available to him. He found his voice almost immediately, which said something about him. Even with his wrists behind his back and the spotlight on him and the helicopter overhead, the default direction was still forward, still reaching for the levers of authority, the way the body reaches for the thing it has relied on, even when it has already been taken away. The phantom limb sensation of power that is no longer there. "This is illegal," he said, and his voice was doing its best under the circumstances. "I am a sworn officer of this county, and this is illegal detention, and I want my union rep on the phone right now." And when Sheriff Pruitt hears about this, Deputy Branson. Dominique had walked over from the Tahoe, and she was standing 2 feet in front of him, not rushed, not performing anything, just there, close enough to look directly into his face without effort, far enough that nothing he could do would reach her. She looked at him with an expression that contained no triumph, no anger, nothing that could be called satisfaction, because those were emotions for a different kind of moment. And this was not that kind of moment. This was a moment for clarity. She reached into her back pocket and produced the gold shield and held it up under the tactical floodlights, steady, unhurried, the same badge he had called a prop 45 minutes ago on a departmental frequency that was already transcribed in the Atlanta field office's incident log. "Special Agent Dominique Reeves," she said. "FBI Southeast Division. Badge number 7731. She let him look at it. She let him look at it the way he had refused to look at it on the highway, the way it would have cost him nothing to look at it then, except the version of tonight where he got to do what he had planned to do. "You are under arrest," she said, "for assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer, deprivation of rights under color of law, and unlawful detention. You have the right to remain silent." She paused, and what she said next, she did not say loudly, and she did not say with any particular emphasis, but she said it looking directly into his eyes with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to say the thing that is most true. "I was just tired, Deputy. I had a long day and I was going home. That is all I was doing on this road. That was all you had to let me do." The simplicity of it hit him differently than anything else that had happened in the last hour. Not the tactical team, not the helicopter, not the handcuffs, this. The absolute devastating smallness of what he had interrupted the gap between what she had wanted, which was nothing, which was the ordinary human thing of driving home at the end of a long day, and what he had turned it into. He opened his mouth and closed it. "This is a mistake," he said finally, and his voice had lost most of its earlier architecture. "When I talk to Pruitt, the sheriff has connections. He has people in Atlanta, people who—" "Put him in the transport," Dominique said to the nearest agent evenly. "We're going to the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department." Something new moved through Branson's face. "Why are you going to the precinct? What are you?" "I want to meet this sheriff of yours," she said. And the small, cold quality of the smile that touched the corner of her mouth was not cruelty. It was the expression of someone who knows exactly what is in a room before she opens the door and who is ready. The agents moved Branson toward the rear Suburban, and the heavy door swung shut behind him and sealed him inside a cage that was smaller and harder than the one in his own patrol car. And through the darkened window, she could see the shape of him trying to make sense of a world that had rearranged itself around him, while he was busy being certain it never would. Marcus Webb came to stand beside her. "Forensics flagged something in his assigned locker 2 hours ago," he said quietly, looking at the patrol car sitting dark on the shoulder. "We need eyes on it." Dominique looked down at the passenger seat of her Tahoe, visible through the open door, the manila folder still there. Case number 9-17. Monroe L., still closed, still unread. "Then let's go," she said. The Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department had been built in 1973 by someone who believed that function was sufficient and that buildings like the people who worked in them did not need to be anything other than what they were. For low brick flat roof, chain link perimeter topped with razor wire, a parking lot large enough for the fleet, and nothing else, a building that made no argument for itself and needed to make none, because the man inside it had been making arguments on its behalf for 22 years and had not yet lost one. It was the center of Dale Pruitt's world, and for the residents of Calhoun Parish it had functioned less as a public institution than as the physical headquarters of a private arrangement who got charged, who got a phone call, who got their name in a report, and who got their name removed from one who owed whom a favor, and when that favor would be collected. For 22 years, these decisions had flowed from one office in the corner of that building, and the building had never, in all that time, had cause to worry about what was coming up the driveway. Tonight, the driveway held 4 FBI Suburbans, an armored support vehicle, and a helicopter maintaining a holding pattern 200 feet overhead. And the lights inside the building were blazing because Branson's radio call had preceded them, and whatever passed for an alarm in Pruitt's network had been triggered. The front doors of the station opened before the convoy had come to a full stop. Sheriff Dale Pruitt came out first, and he came out the way a man comes out when he has decided that whoever is in the driveway is going to find him unimpressed, wide, heavy, filling the doorway in the physical way of a man who has always occupied more space than other people, and has been confirmed in this by every room he has ever entered. Beige uniform strained across the middle white Stetson. At its habitual angle, an unlit cigar clamped in the corner of his mouth like punctuation. A shotgun broken over the crook of his left arm, held with the easy familiarity of something that has lived in that spot for years. He looked at the Suburbans, the federal plates, the tactical gear. He did not look scared. He looked the way a landlord looks when someone shows up at the property uninvited, not threatened, annoyed, the annoyance of a man whose routine has been interrupted and who has not yet decided whether the interruption has any real consequences. But Dominique was watching, and what she saw in the next 3 seconds told her more about Dale Pruitt than everything else she had read in his file. Before he said a single word, before he looked at Webb, before he assessed the tactical team, before he registered anything at all about the specific nature of what was arrayed in his parking lot. His right hand went to the breast pocket of his uniform, and he pulled out his phone, and he typed something quickly, 4 or 5 keystrokes practiced and economical, and put the phone away. Not a 911 call, not long enough for a call. A message. Short, specific, going to someone whose number he did not have to look up. He wasn't panicking. He was activating something. Reaching for the network, the way a man reaches for a light switch in a familiar room, confident that the lights will come on, confident that they always had before, confident in the mechanism, even as the situation around him was changing in ways the mechanism had not been built for. Dominique filed it and held it. Then Pruitt looked at Webb and at the agents, and then his gaze found Dominique taking her in from the feet up, arriving at a conclusion before reaching the face, wearing the conclusion openly, the way certain men wear their assumptions as if they were information rather than choice. He looked at his deputies behind him, then back at her. He chuckled. Short, low, the sound of a man sharing a private understanding with the people he trusts. "Well," he said, and his voice carried across the lot with the ease of someone who has never had to raise it, because every room he has ever been in has gone quiet for him without asking. "Somebody want to tell me what circus this is and what she's got to do with it?" Dominique stepped forward. "I do," she said. "Special Agent Dominique Reeves, FBI Southeast Division," she said, and the words had the weight she intended them to carry, not performed, not amplified, just placed precisely where they needed to land. "We have your Deputy Kyle Branson in federal custody. He drew his service weapon on a federal officer, refused her credentials twice, and attempted an unlawful arrest. I'm here to process him, to search his locker and log records, and to discuss the investigation his actions tonight have opened." Pruitt looked at her the way he looked at things he was considering how to dismiss. "You're the impersonator Branson called in," he said. "I am the officer." "Your deputy pointed a loaded .40 caliber weapon at," she said, "after I identified myself as federal law enforcement twice while my hands were visible on my steering wheel." "Bryce Branson is a good deputy," Pruitt said, and his voice had settled into something flat and transactional, the register of a man getting to business. "He's aggressive. That's a feature, not a fault. Aggressive is what I need on a dark highway at 2 in the morning. If he made a call in the field, that's his call to make, and it's mine to back up." Sheriff Marcus Webb said, stepping up beside Dominique, "This is a federal investigation under Title 18, Section 242. Your deputy is in federal custody. That is not your jurisdiction anymore, and if you obstruct this proceeding in any form, you become a part of it." Pruitt's hand moved. It was a small motion, barely a shift of weight, the hand that had been resting against his thigh, moving fractionally toward the shotgun's trigger guard, and it was so practiced and so natural that it might have read to someone not paying close attention as nothing more than a man adjusting his grip on a weapon he happened to be carrying. But everyone in the parking lot was paying close attention. The deputies behind Pruitt put their hands on their holsters. The FBI agents raised their weapons to the low ready. The helicopter in its holding pattern overhead adjusted slightly, bringing the spotlight to cover the full width of the lot. A standoff, 20 feet of parking lot, and a very long history between the law that was supposed to protect people and the law that had been protecting itself and everything, balanced on what happened in the next 30 seconds. Dominique did not step back. "Sheriff," she said, and her voice was calm in the specific way that calm is most effective, not the calm of someone who is not afraid, but the calm of someone who has made peace with the situation and is now simply moving through it. "I want to be precise about what you're looking at. We have dash cam footage of Deputy Branson drawing his service weapon on a cooperative hands-visible driver who had identified herself as a federal agent. We have audio of him calling that agent's credentials fake on a departmental frequency. We have GPS logs, dispatch records, and a tactical team that responded to an active distress beacon. The case against your deputy is not a question of competing narratives. It is a recording." Something shifted in Pruitt's face. Not fear exactly, but the recalibration of a man who has been in enough negotiations to recognize when the leverage has moved. Then the rear door of one of the Suburbans opened, and the agents brought Branson out, cuffed, mud-streaked uniform, wrecked the full distance between what he had been 2 hours ago and what he was now, visible in every detail. And when he saw Pruitt across the lot, his face cracked open with the specific, desperate relief of a man who still believes that the right person can fix this. "Sheriff," he called, and his voice broke on the word. "Sheriff, tell them who I am. You know me. You've known me for 11 years. Get these off me, I can explain." Pruitt looked at Branson. He looked at him the way a man looks at a calculation that has come out wrong, and then he looked at the Suburbans and the agents and the helicopter overhead, and he did the final arithmetic that had been available to him since the convoy rolled into his parking lot, and the answer was the same answer. It had been the whole time the federal government had brought more to this parking lot than he had, and fighting them here tonight was a war with a predetermined outcome. He was corrupt and had been for 2 decades, but he was not stupid. He looked at Branson with an expression that Dominique recognized immediately, and that Branson had clearly never seen directed at himself before, the expression of a man looking at a piece of his operation that has become a liability, assessing not whether to protect it, but how quickly to cut it off. "Shut up," Bryce Pruitt said. 2 words, flat, final, containing everything Branson had believed about their relationship for 11 years and negating it in a single breath. Branson made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and stopped talking. Pruitt turned to Dominique. What followed had the quality of a cold transactional settlement between 2 parties who each want something the other controls he would give her: the building, the room, the locker, the logs. In exchange, he wanted his lawyer present and a copy of the footage, and this conducted inside, away from the parking lot. "You'll get a copy when the U.S. attorney determines it's time," Dominique said. "And you can have your lawyer. But we're taking the room, the locker, and every log Branson filed in the last 14 months. Pruitt's face tightened. He knew what was in that locker. Had always known, in the careful arm's-length way of a man who asks no questions, he doesn't want answered, what his deputy used the overnight stretches of Highway 31 for. If they opened it, it wasn't just Branson burning. "Be my guest," Pruitt said, and walked back into the building without another word, and the door swung shut behind him, like the close of an act in a play that still had several more acts to go. Interrogation Room B had been accumulating its character for 22 years, the institutional beige applied over whatever color had been there before, the single table bolted to the floor, the 2-way mirror spanning one wall, the smell of stale coffee and old fear that had settled into the materials, the way weather settles into wood, the record of everything the room had witnessed, written not in words, but in the quality of the air inside it. Kyle Branson sat at the near side of the table with his wrists secured to the floor bar and his belt and shoelaces and badge removed and his uniform still damp from the shoulder down. And, without the equipment of his authority, he occupied the space differently than he had on Highway 31. Still large, still physically present, but large. The way something is large when it has been removed from the context that made it dangerous, a tool that is just weight without the hand that knew how to use it. "I know my rights," he said to the tabletop in the voice of someone who has decided that the only available direction is forward. "I haven't done anything wrong. I conducted a lawful traffic stop. The subject was non-compliant. I followed protocol for a resistant subject, and I am fully prepared to file a complete incident report when my union representative, Protocol Marcus Webb, said, settling into the chair across from him with the unhurried ease of a man who has both the time and the evidence to be unhurried, repeating the word as if testing its weight. "Is that what we're calling it?" She was reaching. Branson said, jaw coming forward. She had a weapon. She admitted she had a weapon. She identified herself as a federal agent and offered to retrieve her credentials. Webb said, patient, nearly gentle, the tone of someone correcting a misunderstanding they do not find surprising. "You laughed at her, called her honey, and then you drew your service weapon on a woman with both hands on a steering wheel. I thought the credentials were fake, and your protocol for a suspected fake ID is lethal force." Branson had nothing for that. He sat with it for a moment, still looking for the version of this that could hold together, running through the angles the way you run through angles when you have been getting away with things for a long time, and the habit of expecting exits has not yet been corrected by the reality of the room you are in. "It'll be my word against hers," he said, and even as he said it, the certainty in it was thinner than he wanted it to be. Camera angles are bad at night. Audio doesn't always. The door opened. Agent Terrell Hayes came in with a laptop, set it on the table facing Branson, and opened it to a split screen. "We've pulled footage from the Blackview dash cam unit, the one Agent Reeves mentioned to you when you first approached her vehicle," he said in the level informational voice of someone presenting evidence rather than making an argument. "We also pulled your own dash cam. Your body cam, we should note, was non-functional during the stop." He said it without inflection. He didn't need inflection. Everyone in the room understood what a body cam that is non-functional during a stop means, and what it means when that happens to be the only recording device not working. Hayes pressed play. The split screen showed the evidence with the straightforward honesty of a machine that has no stake in what it captures. The front camera, Highway 31. Dominique's Tahoe, the center line running clean and unbroken under the vehicle for the entire length of the footage. No swerve, no deviation. The white line passing under the vehicle like a thread through a needle. The interior camera, Dominique. Hands on the wheel, fingers spread shoulders level. The particular stillness of someone managing a dangerous situation with training rather than emotion. The lights behind her. Her sigh, flat, resigned, exhausted. Then Branson's voice playing through the laptop speakers in the quiet room. "What are you, some kind of rapper's girlfriend?" The words sounded different in here. They sounded like what they were. Not aggression in the heat of the moment. Not a mistake made under stress. They sounded comfortable. Practiced the words of a man who had said exactly this kind of thing to exactly this kind of person on exactly this road before, and who had never once been required to hear them played back to him afterward. The gun came out. Dominique's hands clear in the interior camera, both of them raised, both of them open palms out, nothing hidden, nothing reaching, nothing that could be argued as a threat by any person who watched the footage with honest eyes. And Branson's face not frightened, not reacting to a threat, not the face of a man making a split-second decision in a dangerous situation. The face of a man doing something he is comfortable doing with the ease of someone for whom this is not new. The footage ended. The silence in the room was the complete kind, not quiet, but absent the silence of a space where the available arguments have been exhausted, and what remains is just what happened. That Webb said, pointing at the screen without looking away from Branson, is 20 years minimum. Kidnapping, aggravated assault, federal civil rights violations. Branson's face had gone the color of old concrete. "I've been going through a divorce," he said, and it came out sideways, disconnected the words of a man trying several doors at once. "I've been under stress. My judgment." "Save it," Dominique said, and she pushed off the wall and walked to the table. "Because that video is bad, Deputy. But it is not the worst thing in this room tonight." She set the evidence box on the table and opened it. Inside the box were 7 driver's licenses. She placed them on the table one at a time, face up, laid out in a row with the deliberate care of someone building something she intends to be looked at. 7 photographs, 7 names, 7 women who had been stopped on Highway 31 at night by a man with a badge and a practiced method, and a county behind him that had never once asked what he was doing out there in the dark. All of them were black, all between 23 and 42. Not one had an arrest record. Not one had been issued a ticket on the night Branson stopped her. Not one had any record in the official logs of even having been stopped. Those entries had been deleted or never created the careful housekeeping of a man who understood the difference between what happened and what the paperwork said happened. But he had kept the licenses. He had kept them in his locker in a manila envelope at the back of the top shelf behind his spare belt, and a tube of hand cream and a photograph of himself at a fishing tournament. And the reason he kept them was the reason a certain kind of man keeps certain kinds of things, the record of a transaction, the evidence of a power that was real even when no one else knew. It existed, the proof in the hand that the world had cooperated. Dominique picked up the first one. Kendra Wells, stopped 8 months ago on her way back from her mother's birthday dinner in Baton Rouge. No ticket, no report, just her license in your locker. She set it down, picked up the second. Patricia Dumas, 29 graduate student, stopped 11 months ago. No record of the stop in your logs, doesn't exist on paper. She went through them, each one, same pace, same voice. Not loud, not charged, the measured delivery of someone laying bricks, each one adding weight to the structure she is building, each one making the next one harder to look away from. The seventh she held for a moment before placing it down. Latasha Monroe, 34 years old. Nurse. Stopped 8 months ago on her way home from a 12-hour overnight shift. She set it down gently. Her 7-year-old son was asleep in the back seat. Branson's hands, both cuffed to the floor bar, had begun to shake. "We called Latasha Monroe on the way here tonight," Dominique said. She answered on the second ring because she was already awake, because she's been waking up at 2 and 3 in the morning for 8 months and not being able to go back to sleep. When I told her who I was and why I was calling, she started crying before I finished the first sentence. Not from relief. She cried the way people cry when something true has finally been said out loud after a very long time, when the weight of keeping a secret that was never theirs to keep has finally been acknowledged by someone with the authority to acknowledge it. She let the room be quiet for a moment. She kept quiet. Dominique continued, "Because you told her no one would believe her word against your badge. And based on everything she understood about how this county worked, she believed you. She went home that night and she didn't tell her husband, and she didn't tell her mother, and she has been driving 40 extra minutes every day to avoid this highway ever since, because the alternative is driving past the place where a man in a uniform explained to her on a dark roadside with her child sleeping 10 feet away exactly how alone she was." Something broke open in the room. Not loudly, it was more like a seam giving way under pressure that has been building for a long time. The quiet, structural sound of something that has been held together by the assumption that it would never be tested, giving way at last. Branson's head was down. His shoulders were moving. "That's a lie," he said, but the words came out without force, without the jaw and the forward lean of before they came out, like something being said because it was the last available thing to say, not because anyone in the room, including him, believed it. "We have 7 licenses," Webb said, his voice even. "We have 6 witnesses who, now that federal investigators are involved, are prepared to speak. We have body cam logs showing malfunctions on every stop involving a female driver on this highway over the last 14 months. And we have tonight's footage, which you've just watched." He closed the folder in front of him. "You weren't a troubled cop," Kyle Dominique said, and the use of his first name, quiet without anger, seemed to land in a different place than everything else, because it contained no contempt, which was worse than contempt in the particular way that being seen clearly is always worse than being judged. You were a predator. You used this badge and this highway the way a hunter uses a blind to get close to something that didn't see you coming because you were confident that it had no one coming for it. Tonight, you stopped the wrong car. The silence that followed was the complete kind. The kind that happens after something true has been said plainly in a room, and there is simply nothing that can be put after it. Branson's chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders shook. And then, in a voice that had been stripped of everything built on top of it over 11 years, the swagger, the ease, the practiced contempt, he said, "I want a deal. I'll give you Pruitt. I'll give you everything, the tow lot, the ledger, the payments, all of it. Please." His voice broke on the last word. "Please, just don't put me in general population." Dominique looked at him for a long moment. The man in front of her was not the man from the highway. Not because he had changed, but because the thing that had made him feel like that man had been removed, and without it he was just this, a frightened person in a chair, asking for the mercy he had never once considered extending to anyone on that road. She felt nothing particular about him. "You'll get whatever deal the U.S. Attorney's Office decides to offer," she said. "But you are going to prison, and everyone inside is going to know exactly what kind of cop you were." She stepped back from the table. "Book him," she said to Webb. "I want to be there when we talk to the sheriff." She walked out without looking back. The bullpen of the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department had the specific quality of a theater. Between acts, the same people, the same furniture, the same room. But the energy that had made it what it was had gone out of it, and what remained was the unsettled flatness of people who are waiting for something they are not sure they want to arrive. The deputies sat at their desks with the focused attention of men who have discovered a sudden deep interest in their paperwork. No one made eye contact as Dominique moved through the room. The ones near the door found reasons to look at their keyboards. The one nearest the coffee machine poured himself a cup he didn't appear to want and stood with his back to the room, both hands around the mug. She had seen this before in other departments, in other rooms. It was the body language of people who had been inside a machine for long enough to know what the machine was doing, but had made the decision somewhere along the way to treat that knowledge as something that didn't belong to them. A drawer they didn't open, a conversation that happened in a room they happened not to be in. It wasn't innocence, but it wasn't the same thing as what was in room B either, and the distinction mattered. Dominique walked through at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, looking at each face long enough for it to understand that it had been looked at, and then she reached the far end of the room and looked through the glass wall of the corner office. Sheriff Dale Pruitt was on the phone. He had taken the Stetson off it, sat on the desk blotter in front of him, the hat that had sat at its confident angle every time she'd seen him tonight, and without it, he looked older. The dome of his head pale above the weathered face, the expression he was wearing, one of concentrated urgency working the call with low, quick words, and the full-body lean of someone who is trying to get a specific thing from someone who is not giving it. He was calling in a favor. She could read the shape of it through the glass, the number he'd dialed without looking, the immediate answer, the quick, specific ask, and now the silence of someone waiting for yes and receiving something that was not quite yes. The mechanism was being activated, but the mechanism was not responding the way it always had, and Pruitt's face was doing what faces do when a reliable thing fails unexpectedly, the small recalibration, the reaching for the next lever. He looked up from the middle distance and found her eyes through the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Dominique raised two fingers slowly to her own eyes and pointed them steady and without expression directly at him. "I see you. I have seen you. I am going to keep seeing you." Pruitt held the look for 3 seconds. What moved across his face in those 3 seconds was not fear. It was too controlled for fear, too practiced. It was the look of a man who has been managing something from a distance and has just been informed that the distance has closed. He put the phone down. Marcus Webb appeared at Dominique's shoulder, voice low. "Tech team confirmed. Deleted files on Branson's dashcam archive go back 26 months. 14 additional incidents identified. Victim contact is underway." 26 months, she said. "That's as far back as the archive runs," Webb said. "Could be longer." Dominique looked down at the folder she was still carrying. Case number 9-17, Monroe L., closed, still unread. The case she had been assigned 3 weeks ago. The case that had come in through the FBI's civil rights tip line as an anonymous complaint describing a pattern of stops on a specific Louisiana highway targeting a specific type of driver. The case she had been quietly building through records requests and unanswered call logs, and the careful accumulation of information that doesn't prove anything individually, but that begins in sufficient quantity to show the shape of something. The case whose primary subject was Kyle Branson, who had stopped her. Tonight. On the highway where she was going to review the file about him, in front of the mile marker listed in the first victim's complaint. He pulled over the one person in the federal system who already had his name on her desk, Webb said with the tone of someone who has been in this work long enough to have stopped being surprised by the universe's sense of design, but who still occasionally notes it. "He did?" Dominique said. She set the folder down on the nearest desk gently, with the careful deliberateness of something being put down that has served its purpose, and looked back at Pruitt through the glass. He was sitting very still now, looking at the hat on the blotter in front of him, with the expression of a man reading something in it that he would prefer not to be reading. "Get the warrants finalized on the tow lot and the property records," she said to Webb. "I want everything cross-referenced against the department's financials by 6 a.m. She kept looking at Pruitt. "And let's go get him before that phone call he's been trying to make actually connects." The night broke toward dawn the way August nights break in Louisiana. Not cleanly, not with any particular relief, but with a slow, reluctant lightening at the eastern tree line. The dark going gray before it goes blue. The stars thinning one at a time, like an audience leaving before the final scene, because they already know how it ends. Sheriff Dale Pruitt's property on the western edge of the parish had been described in county assessor records as a ranch-style residence, 12 acres, modest improvements. What it was in practice was a sprawling compound that announced without subtlety that the man who owned it had been making money from somewhere that his public salary had never been designed to produce a heated stable. A private lake with a dock, a 4-car garage whose doors faced away from the road, the back porch alone running longer than most people's living rooms. Pruitt was in the study. He had been there since before 3 in the morning, since the phone calls had stopped producing what he needed them to produce, and the shape of the situation had finished resolving itself into something he could no longer usefully reframe. The study was where the things he needed to make disappear were kept, specifically a black leather ledger in the false-backed bottom drawer of the desk wrapped in cloth, containing in his own handwriting 22 years of arrangements, the tow lot operator, the evidence room, the judge's golf schedule with its handwritten dollar amounts in the margins, the monthly figures from the Highway 31 traffic stops that had never appeared in any official accounting. He had been feeding it into the heavy-duty shredder for 40 minutes. He was not done when he heard it. Not a siren that was the first and most important thing he registered. The complete absence of warning sound. The sound that would have meant someone was still playing by the rules that gave him time. That meant someone in the approaching party was still operating in the world where Dale Pruitt was a man you called ahead for. What he heard instead was the crunch of heavy tires on his gravel driveway. Multiple vehicles moving at a speed that was not the speed of people who expected to be let in. He stopped shredding, moved to the window, looked through the blind slats. The front gate, wrought iron 8 feet, his father's gate, installed in 1987, was already gone. The FBI Bearcat had taken it off its hinges without fully decelerating the iron, folding away from the posts like paper, and behind it, a dozen Suburbans were pouring onto the lawn in the gray pre-dawn light. And the loudspeaker on the Bearcat was saying in the flat, amplified voice of a machine that expects to be obeyed and has brought enough to ensure it, "FBI federal search warrant occupants of the residence, come to the front door with your hands visible." Pruitt looked at the shredder, at the drawer with the unfinished portions of the ledger, at the shotgun mounted on the wall, custom stock, his initials on the plate, a beautiful gun, the gun of a man who owned things. For 1 second, the second before rational thought completes its reassertion, his hand moved toward the wall. Then he looked out the window again at the Bearcat and the Suburbans and the agents deploying across his lawn with the focused efficiency of people who have done this in the dark before and who have brought enough to cover every exit he has, and he understood with a clarity that comes when every remaining option has been removed exactly where he was. He walked to the front door and opened it with both hands raised. Dominique was standing behind the lead tactical officer's riot shield, and she was not in a hoodie this time. She wore full tactical gear plate carrier ballistic helmet, her gold badge displayed prominently on her chest, visible from 30 feet in any direction. Pruitt came down the front steps. Without the Stetson, without the shotgun, without the deputies and the parking lot and the machinery of 22 years behind him, he was just a man in the pre-dawn with his hands in the air, walking toward what was waiting for him. "Sheriff Dale Pruitt," Dominique said, and her voice carried across the quiet morning. the way voices carry when there is nothing competing with them, you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, drug trafficking, and obstruction of justice. As the agents moved him and the steel closed around his wrists, Pruitt looked at her with the last piece of himself that was still intact, which was a reflex older than thought. You think you won something? There's always another me. There's always another Branson. You can't arrest a whole way of thinking. Dominique looked at him steadily. Maybe not, she said, but I can arrest you. And everyone who comes after you is going to know what happened here tonight, and they're going to think twice. She nodded to the agents. They walked him to the vehicle. Her phone buzzed. Forensics team text message. Branson deleted cam archive confirmed. 14 additional incidents. Victim contact underway now. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were pulling apart in the east, and the light coming through was the clean, particular light of a morning that has been earned. Justice in the federal system does not move at the speed of the moments that make it necessary. It moves at the speed of institutions, which is the speed of paperwork and depositions and scheduling and continuances and the careful grinding accumulation of process that exists because the alternative is something faster and less reliable. And the months between an arrest and a verdict are spent in the particular kind of waiting that is not passive but exhausting. That costs something from you every day. You do it because you have let yourself believe that something true might actually be confirmed by a process larger than the one that hurt you. For the residents of Calhoun Parish, the 5 months between the arrests and the opening day of trial in New Orleans were those months. The breath held at depth, the careful, effortful waiting. The federal courthouse on Camp Street was at capacity when the doors opened on the first morning of testimony, had been at capacity since before they opened, and the air inside carried the particular smell of a consequential day, floor wax and nervous sweat, and the institutional undertone of a building that has heard many difficult things said out loud within it and will hear more. The press had named it the Calhoun Purge, because the story was large enough to need a shorthand. The dash cam footage had been published months before the trial, and the image had traveled everywhere. Branson's face. At the moment his gun was up, and Dominique's hands were clearly visible and down, and the image had produced the specific response that clear, undeniable footage produces when it shows a man doing something in front of a camera that he believed no camera was going to hold him accountable for. Kyle Branson sat at one defense table in a suit that had never quite learned his body. Dale Pruitt sat at the other, smaller than his photograph in the papers, wearing his expensive suit, like something borrowed from a previous version of himself. In the gallery in the front row, on the left side of the aisle, 8 women sat. They had come from across the parish and across the state from Baton Rouge and Lafayette, and a town 60 miles north that didn't appear on most maps, and some of them had taken days off work they could not afford, and some of them had arranged childcare at 6 in the morning, and some of them had driven through the night to be here for the first session. They sat in a line with the quality of people who have been told many times that their presence does not change things, and who have decided this time to be present anyway. One of them wore dark blue scrubs. She had come directly from a 12-hour overnight because she was not going to miss a day of this for any reason the world could offer. That was Latasha Monroe. They did not hold signs. They did not speak to the cameras. They sat with their hands in their laps and their eyes directed at the backs of the 2 men at the defense tables. Not with rage, not dramatically, but with the steady, unrelenting attention of people who have been waiting a long time to be in a room, where what happened to them is the official subject and who intend to be present for every minute of it. When Dana Voss delivered the prosecution's opening statement, she stood at the corner of the table and did not perform and did not reach for drama. She simply described what had happened on Highway 31 on an August night, and then she described what the evidence would show had been happening on that road for 26 months before that night. And then she said something to the jury that was not legal language and was not procedural, but was simply true. The women in the front row of this gallery did not come here to be dramatic. They came because they were owed a reckoning that was a long time delayed, and the law finally, today, is prepared to provide one. When the prosecution played the dashcam footage on the courtroom's large monitors, the same footage that had been published, but here in this room projected on screens large enough to fill the jury's full field of vision, the audio through speakers that left nothing out. The room went to a silence that had texture and weight. The jury watched Branson raise his weapon. They watched his face, the contempt in it, the ease of it, the absolute absence of hesitation that belongs to someone who has done this before, or gotten close enough to it that the gap has closed. They watched Dominique's hands, steady open palms, out the hands of a woman who has been trained to make herself as clear as possible in moments where clarity is the only thing that might save her. 3 jurors in interviews after the verdict said it was not the gun that they kept thinking about in deliberations. It was the laugh, the short bark of genuine amusement Branson produced when he first saw the gold shield, the sound of a man finding genuinely funny, the idea that the woman in front of him could be something he needed to take seriously. That sound through the courtroom speakers did something to a jury that no argument and no exhibit could have done on its own. It made them feel with a completeness that bypassed reason and went straight to something older, exactly what kind of man they were looking at, and exactly what kind of world he had been operating in and for how long. The prosecution called Latasha Monroe on the 3rd day of testimony, and she walked to the stand with the specific composure of someone who has been practicing this moment in her own mind for 8 months, not rehearsing words exactly, but practicing the thing beneath the words, the way you hold yourself when you are about to say something true that is going to cost something to say and that you intend to say regardless. She had gone home after the overnight and changed. Dark gray blouse, black slacks, simple the clothes of a woman who wants to be seen without distraction. She raised her right hand and gave her oath in the clear, steady voice of someone who understands the weight of a promise and does not make them lightly. Dinah Voss began with the simple things: name, age, occupation. Address, the number of years she had worked in the cardiac unit at St. Francis Medical Center. The name and age of her son, who was 8 now and had been told that his mother had an appointment this morning and would be home for dinner. Ms. Monroe Voss said, "I'd like you to tell the jury in your own words what happened on the night of March 14th. Latasha looked at the jury. All 12 of them. She had been told by the victim advocate to focus on 1 or 2 faces and stay there. But what she did instead was what she had decided to do. She looked at each of them, one at a time, for just a fraction of a second. Each making the contact that said, "I am going to need you to hear this. Not just understand it. Hear it." She told them about the shift 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. 12 hours in cardiac. The kind of shift where by the end your feet have stopped making individual complaints and have merged into one continuous general protest. She told them that she had picked up her son from her mother's house at 7:30, that he had climbed into his car seat and put his dinosaur blanket over his knees and been asleep before they reached the highway, the way small children sleep in cars, completely instantly, with the trustingness of someone who has no reason to be anywhere but where they are. She told them that the lights came on behind her, near mile marker 31, that she had pulled over, that she had done everything her parents had taught her, window down, hands visible, yes sir, no sir, and that Deputy Branson had told her she had been swerving, which was not true, and that he was going to need her to step out for a field sobriety test. She told them about the roadside. She told them what he said when they were standing outside the vehicle. She told them the terms he had laid out, what she could do to go home that night, and what would happen if she didn't, and the specific shape of the threat involving her son and Child Protective Services, and the days it would take to get him back, and what those days would be like for a 7-year-old who didn't understand where his mother had gone. The courtroom was very quiet. One of the jurors in the second row turned her face away for a moment and then turned back. The court reporter's fingers had slowed. Latasha paused, took a drink of water, Set the glass down with both hands carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you need them to be. My son was asleep in the back seat, she said. He had his blanket pulled up to his chin and his mouth was open a little, the way it is when he's really out. She stopped. Her jaw worked. She did not look away from the jury. The whole time I was standing on that road, every second of it, I was thinking about one thing, not what was happening to me. Just when he wakes up and I'm not there, who tells him where I am? Who explains it to him in words he can understand? Who he calls when he's scared? A juror in the front row, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, pressed her lips together. I went home, Latasha said. He let me go home. I need you to know that I want you to understand exactly what that sentence contains. He let me go home, as if it was his decision to make, as if it was something he was giving me. She let that sit in the room. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my pastor or my best friend or my sister or any of the people I talk to when something is wrong. I carried it alone for 8 months because Deputy Branson told me that my word meant nothing against his badge. And based on everything I knew about how this county worked, I had no reason to think he was wrong. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the courtroom windows, a truck passed in the distance, the sound of it coming and going. The night Agent Reeves called me, Latasha said, and her voice shifted, not breaking but changing register slightly, the way voices change when they arrive at the part of a thing that still costs something to say. I started crying before she finished her first sentence. And I want to explain that because I don't cry easily, and I don't cry in front of strangers, and I was embarrassed by it at first. I cried because she said my name. She said what had happened to me, out loud, confirmed it. Someone with the authority to confirm it said this happened and it matters, and I am calling you because of it. And that was the first time in 8 months that I believed what had happened to me was real. Not that I hadn't known, but knowing something and having it confirmed by the world are different things. I had been carrying it alone and in secret and in silence, and she said my name, and I understood for the first time that I hadn't made it up. She folded her hands in her lap. That I wasn't nothing, she said. The courtroom held that sentence for a long time. The last day of testimony arrived with the particular quality of last days in long proceedings, the room filling earlier than usual, the conversations in the gallery quieter and more focused, the sense of people gathering themselves for something they have been building toward, and that is now at last here. Dana Voss called Special Agent Dominique Reeves as the prosecution's final witness, and Dominique walked to the stand the way she walked into every room, without preamble, without performance, taking up exactly the space she occupied and not apologizing for it. She gave her oath with the directness of someone who understands what an oath is and what it is for. And she sat down and looked out at the courtroom with the steady, clear-eyed calm of a woman who has been in difficult rooms for a long time and has learned to take them as they are. She was in her dress uniform, the dark navy jacket, white shirt, the gold badge pinned where it was supposed to be, the full official version of the thing that Kyle Branson had called a prop on the shoulder of Highway 31, shining under the courtroom lights in the same unstoppable way gold always shines, indifferent to what anyone thinks of it. Voss walked her through the chronology, the conference, the drive, the stop, and Dominique answered in the precise economical language of someone who has testified enough times to know that extra words are usually a disadvantage, that the truth stated plainly is always more powerful than the truth decorated. Then Voss stepped back slightly and changed the character of her questioning. Agent Reeves, I want to ask you something that isn't in your official report. I want to ask you in your own words what it was like to have a weapon pointed at your chest on that road. The room was very quiet. I was tired, Dominique said, and she said it the way you say something true that you have held for a while and are now finally setting down in public. I had worked 14 hours. I had music on. I had a cold drink. I was doing 53 miles an hour and I was going home. When the gun came out, I didn't feel fear the way people expect. I felt calculation. That's what training gives you, not the absence of fear, but something functional to do with it, while the fear is doing whatever fear does. I calculated, I stayed calm, I used what I had. She looked at the jury. I want to be honest about something, though. I stayed calm because I had training and a panic beacon and a tactical team 11 minutes away and a supervisor who answered on the first ring. I had resources. She paused. Latasha Monroe had a 7-year-old in the back seat and a 12-hour shift behind her, and a dark road and a man with a badge telling her how the world worked in this county. Kendra Wells had her word against his. Every woman in that front row had her word against his badge, and they had been given every reason by this county, by this department, by 22 years of an arrangement that nobody challenged to believe that the badge was going to win. She was looking directly at the jury now, unhurried. Deputy Branson did not stop me because I was swerving. He stopped me because of what he saw when he looked at me, and because he had been operating on this road long enough to believe that what he saw meant no one was coming for me. He was wrong about me because I happened to carry a badge, but he should have been wrong about all of them. He should have been wrong about every single woman he stopped on that highway. That is what this room is for. That is what today is for. She stepped down. Dana Voss did not offer a closing remark. She didn't need to. The defense attorney's closing statement lasted 38 minutes. He argued context, he argued stress, he argued the difficulty of policing dark highways alone at night, and he argued it with the competence of someone doing the best available job with what he had, which was not much. Nobody in the room, including the defense attorney, believed it was going to change what was coming. The jury was out for 4 hours and 23 minutes. In the gallery, this felt like a long time. In reality, for a case of this complexity, the number of charges, the number of defendants, the volume of evidence that needed to be formally reviewed before any vote, it was not long at all. It was, in fact, the time of a jury that had made up its mind relatively quickly and was spending the remainder of its deliberation making sure the paperwork matched the decision. When the foreperson stood, the room performed the particular collective stillness of people who understand simultaneously that something is about to be said that they will remember for the rest of their lives. Kyle Branson gripped the edge of the defense table with both hands. The tremor that had been in his hands since the night of his arrest had in the months since migrated. It was in his jaw, now a small, constant vibration that no act of composure could entirely suppress, the body expressing something the face was trying not to. Dale Pruitt sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him, wearing the expression of a man attempting dignity as a last resort, the face of someone who has spent a long time above consequences and is now discovering that the ground when you finally reach it is harder than it looked from above. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law. Kyle Branson. We find the defendant guilty. The gallery exhaled. Not a cheer. Not quite something older and quieter than a cheer. The sound of a breath that has been held for 5 months finally being released by the bodies that were holding it. On the count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon on a federal officer guilty. Branson's hands tightened on the table edge. On the count of unlawful detention guilty. The verdicts came one after another. Each one the same word, and the word landed each time in the same place. Not like a blow, but like a weight being placed methodically on something that had been asserting its own weightlessness for too long. By the 8th count, Branson's head was down. By the 12th, a woman in the front row, not Latasha, one of the others, a woman who had spent 5 months telling herself she was fine, reached quietly for the hand of the woman beside her and held it. 18 counts total, 18 times. For Dale Pruitt, the RICO charges held completely. The jury found that he had run the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department as a criminal enterprise, that the tow lot arrangements and the evidence room diversions and the network of favors and protections that had insulated Branson and a dozen others from accountability for 2 decades were not a series of independent failures, but a single deliberate construction built and maintained by one man who had confused his office with his ownership of it. The king of Calhoun Parish was dethroned. The Honorable Federal Judge Evelyn Marsh, a woman whose reputation in the federal judiciary was built on 2 decades of rulings that treated corruption in public office as the specific and serious betrayal. It is adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at Branson in his orange jumpsuit and let the silence after the verdicts run to its full weight before she spoke. "Mr. Branson," she said, and her voice went everywhere in that room without effort, "you were entrusted with a badge which in this country represents a promise. The promise that the law will protect everyone equally, that the power of the state will not be used as a personal instrument. You did not merely break that promise. You built deliberately and over a long period of time a practice of breaking it. You hunted women on a dark road because you understood correctly that they had been given every reason to believe they were alone. You were right about this county for a long time. You were wrong about the night you stopped Special Agent Reeves. But I want the record to reflect that the harm was not the night you were caught. The harm was the 11 years before it." She reached for the gavel. "Kyle Branson, 24 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Then she turned. "Dale Pruitt, you were elected by the people of this parish, and you used that election as the foundation of a criminal architecture built on their suffering. You are sentenced to life in federal prison." The gavel came down. In the front row, Latasha Monroe closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long moment, not praying exactly, not crying exactly, but doing the thing the body does when it has been braced against something for a very long time and is finally carefully allowed to stop. The long exhale, the unclenching, the particular sensation of a weight that has been present for so long you forgot it had a before lifting. When she opened her eyes, Branson was being led away. And Dominique Reeves, at the edge of the prosecution table, met Branson's gaze across the room as he passed, and she held it without triumph, without anger, without anything except the clear, settled finality of something completed, and gave him one slow nod. "This is accounted for. It is done." USP Pollock sits in the flat, piney country of central Louisiana, about 90 miles from mile marker 31 on Highway 31. And there is a geography to that proximity that is not accidental. The same state, the same August heat, the same Louisiana sky overhead, but a world that shares nothing else with the one Kyle Branson had spent 11 years building for himself, a world of concrete and fluorescent light, and the specific human density of a maximum security federal penitentiary where the rules are enforced by people who were not hired to like you, and where the reputation you carry through the door is the reputation you will have until you leave. Branson had filed for protective custody before sentencing. His attorney had filed for it again the day sentencing was handed down. The request had been received, confirmed, and approved in principle. His status as a former law enforcement officer was noted. The nature of his charges was noted, the specific risk profile of a dirty cop in general. Population was noted, and the system had done what systems do, which is acknowledge the information and route it to the appropriate department, which routed it to an intake coordinator who was processing 1,100 transfers that month and who could not, under subsequent questioning, specifically recall this one. The paperwork was lost. Whether it was genuinely misplaced in the backlog of an underfunded intake department that was running 60% of the staffing it needed, or whether someone in that department had looked at the name and the charges and the face in the booking photo and made a quiet, personal decision to let the process proceed without interference, that question was investigated and never fully resolved because the person responsible had processed so many intakes that this one had no distinguishing features except the ones that, if you were the kind of person who kept track of these things, made it exactly the kind you didn't rush. 2 weeks into his sentence, the door of Branson's isolation cell opened. The corrections officer in the doorway looked at the transfer sheet in his hand, looked at Branson and said, "Pack your things. You're moving to C block. There's a separation order." Branson said, immediately standing up, "I have a documented separation order. I'm a former officer and there's a serious safety. Computer says C block." The officer said, looking at the sheet, "I need to speak to the warden. I need to speak to my attorney. There has been a processing error and I can get you a form to file a grievance," the officer said in the voice of someone who has offered this to many people in many situations and for whom the words have become functionally identical to nothing. "You can file it when you get to C block. Move." C block was, as its designation suggested, the third housing unit. A long two-tier cell block, 182 men, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency you stopped consciously hearing after 3 days, but that your body kept registering at some level. Below thought, the television mounted at the far end of the tier, playing something nobody was watching at a volume just loud enough to fill the space. When Branson walked onto the tier carrying his belongings, the block did not go quiet. It went different. The noise stayed, the voices, the steel, the television, but the quality of it shifted in the way a room shifts when someone enters who does not belong there. A change in the air that moved from person to person, not as information, but as a signal, the recognition that precedes identification. The body reading something the eyes have not yet confirmed. News in federal penitentiaries travels differently than it travels outside. Not through phones or newspapers or official channels, but through the specific human network of a closed population that has nothing but time, and that applies its collective intelligence to the things that matter in that population, and what matters in that population is who the people around you are and what they did to get there, and what that means for the dynamics of the space you share. They had known who Branson was since the day he arrived at intake. A dirty cop, a woman hunter, a man who had pointed a gun at a federal agent and laughed at her badge, and who had for 11 years used a dark Louisiana highway as his personal territory. The men of C Block were not an abstract moral authority, and they were not in a position to claim clean hands on most subjects, but on this one, on the subject of a man who had used a badge to do what Branson had done to women who were alone and couldn't fight back, they had a position, and it was unanimous. Branson made it to the cafeteria at lunchtime. He took a tray and kept his head down and walked for the back corner table, the empty one, the one that was going to be hardest to reach from anywhere else, the one that offered the most wall and the least open space with the focused, contracted physicality of a man trying to become smaller than his own body, and he almost reached it. "Yo!" It came from his left. Not loud, not angry, just a voice addressing a fact. "Officer Branson." He stopped. He turned slowly, and at a table 10 feet to his left with 4 other men who had risen from their seats without hurry, in the unhurried way of things that have been decided, sat Raymond Caldwell. Branson remembered Raymond Caldwell the way you remember something you did deliberately that you had reason to believe was buried. He remembered the slow afternoon 6 years ago, when the month's quota was 2 arrests short, and he had retrieved the bag from his trunk, small resealable, the kind of bag that appears in reports as found in suspect's vehicle. And he remembered the look on Caldwell's face when the cuffs went on, the disbelief, the confusion of a man who knew with absolute certainty that he had done nothing and could not yet process the information that this was not going to protect him. Raymond Caldwell had lost his job, his house, 4 years of his life in a cell, not unlike this one, for a conviction that rested entirely on evidence that Kyle Branson had placed in his vehicle with his own hands on a slow afternoon because he needed the numbers to work out. Raymond was standing now, and he was not a small man, and what was in his face was not rage. Rage has heat, has movement, has the quality of something that might burn out. What was in Raymond Caldwell's face was something colder and more patient, something that had been waiting for a specific moment for 6 years and had arrived at it and was in no hurry at all. Branson's tray hit the floor. The crash of it, the plastic, the food, the silverware scattering across the linoleum brought every head in the cafeteria around, and the room went to the particular silence of an audience that has arrived at the moment it has been waiting for. Branson stumbled backward into a corrections officer, walking the aisle, grabbing the officer's sleeve with both hands, the specific, desperate grip of a man who has just understood that being right about what is about to happen does not mean it isn't about to happen. "Help me," he said, and his voice came out in a register he had never used before, high, stripped entirely without the armor that had carried it for 11 years. "Please, you have to help me. They're going to—" The officer stopped. He looked at Branson's face. Then he looked at Raymond Caldwell standing 10 feet away, not moving, not speaking. He looked at the men flanking Raymond. He looked back at Branson. And what passed between the officer and Raymond in the 3 seconds that followed was not a conversation and not an agreement. It was a recognition, the specific understanding that sometimes exists between people who know what a man did and who have each independently arrived at the same conclusion about what it means. The officer removed Branson's hands from his sleeve, slowly, deliberately, the way you remove something that has attached itself to you without invitation. "I didn't see anything," he said, quietly, without emphasis, as a simple statement of how the next several minutes were going to go. Then he turned and walked out of the cafeteria, and the door swung shut behind him, with the heavy, settled sound of a latch finding its catch, and Kyle Branson stood in the center of a circle that was closing in a room where no one was coming to help him on a highway that had finally run out of road. He opened his mouth, but in C-Block of USP Pollock, no one was listening. There is a specific kind of mourning that comes after you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and it has at last been set down. Not a dramatic mourning. Not a mourning that makes any announcement, just an ordinary mourning that is different from the ones before it, because the weight is not there when you wake up and your body doesn't know what to do with the space it has been vacated. Latasha Monroe had that morning the day after sentencing. She woke at 5:45, the same alarm she had been waking to for 12 years, and she lay in the gray early light coming through the bedroom curtain and waited for the tightening across her chest that had been there every morning for 8 months, the low-level dread that had installed itself in her body like a tenant who arrived without asking and had been making itself comfortable since March. It wasn't there, not completely gone. She was honest enough with herself to know that things don't vanish overnight, that the body keeps its own records and releases them on its own schedule. But it had receded enough that she could draw a full breath, the kind that goes all the way to the bottom, and that was something she had not been able to do easily since the night on Highway 31. She got up and went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table in the early quiet. And 20 minutes later, Deshaun came padding in wearing his socks and his dinosaur pajamas with the worn knees and climbed into the chair beside her and asked what was for breakfast. And she looked at his face. His completely ordinary, entirely untroubled 8-year-old faced the face of someone who had been sleeping in the back seat of a car on a March night and had woken up the next morning not knowing what his mother had done to bring him home, and felt something move through her that was not pain. It was the feeling of having protected something worth protecting, and having been confirmed in that protection by a room full of people who had been willing to say so out loud. She made him eggs. 3 weeks after sentencing, Raymond Caldwell received a letter from the federal court confirming that his conviction had been vacated following Kyle Branson's complete admission regarding the planted evidence. His record was cleared. The county, in a settlement whose language was careful not to use the word wrongful, but whose dollar amount said it plainly acknowledged what had been taken from him. He got a job the following month as a security officer at a federal building in Baton Rouge. On his first morning, he put on a white button-down shirt with a navy tie and stood in front of the bathroom mirror for 10 full minutes before he left the house. He wasn't vain about it. He wasn't looking at the tie. He was looking at the man wearing it. The one who had made it here to this morning, to this mirror, to this second chance that should have been the first chance and that he intended from here to treat accordingly. ASAC. Marcus Webb was promoted to Executive Director of Operations, FBI Southeast Region. His acceptance remarks were 43 words long. He was not a man who used more words than a thing required. Federal Prosecutor Dana Voss was confirmed as United States Attorney for the Southern District of Louisiana. Her investiture speech ran 8 minutes. The last sentence was placed on a placard in the lobby of the new Calhoun Parish Government Building, put there by someone who did not ask for permission, and the people responsible for removing it kept not getting around to it. Justice isn't the absence of darkness. It's what happens when you refuse to look away. The Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department was restructured under a federal consent decree. Its territory redistributed its command, vacated its records, turned over to an independent office that spent 14 months in those files and found, as anyone paying attention had expected to find, that the network of protection and silence had more names in it than two. More arrests, more trials, more mornings in more courtrooms. The work continued. It always does. The 8 women from the front row gave interviews eventually on their own time in their own words to the journalists and the podcasters and the college student who drove 6 hours to ask questions and listened without interrupting. Latasha Monroe was not among them. She had said what she needed to say in a federal courtroom to 12 strangers who had heard her and believed her, and that was enough. She was done carrying it. It had been received. February in Louisiana is the month when the air gives something back. 2 degrees, sometimes 3. The particular coolness that is not possible in summer, and that makes everything under it look sharper and more itself. The sky going the deep blue of a season that has room for color again after all those months of heat pressing down. Dominique Reeves was driving south on Highway 31 on a Tuesday afternoon with the windows down and Miles Davis on the radio. Not kind of blue tonight, but something later and more intricate. One of the recordings where Davis was working on a thing he hadn't finished working out yet. The music of someone still in the middle of figuring something out, which she liked for reasons she could not entirely have explained. She was wearing her own clothes. Jeans, a rust-colored sweater, her arm resting on the window frame with her fingers in the cool air, feeling the afternoon move past her hand the way she had felt it move past her hand on the August night 6 months ago, when the drive had been in the other direction and had ended differently than she expected. She was going home. Not from anywhere official. She had taken a week. The first real stretch of days that belonged entirely to her in 4 years, and had spent most of it at her mother's house in Atlanta doing nothing that mattered except being somewhere that knew her before she was the person she had become, which turned out to be exactly the kind of restoration that 4 years of 14-hour days had been accumulating a debt toward. She was going home because she wanted to be home, because home was the destination, and there was nothing between here and there except the highway and the music and the February air and the pines passing on both sides in the long rhythm of a road that has been driven many times. She passed mile marker 35, then 34, then 33. She felt her foot ease off the accelerator slightly, not enough to change the speed, just a small involuntary acknowledgement of approach. Mile marker 31. The gravel shoulder was empty, just gravel and the tree line and the long, flat stretch of road going south. The same road it had always been without any visible record of what had happened on it. No marker, no sign, nothing that would tell a passing driver that anything particular had occurred here, because roads do not keep that kind of record. She pulled onto the shoulder anyway, put the car in park, left the engine running and the music playing. She sat with the windows down and the February air coming through and looked at the road. She thought about the August night, the music, the cold drink, the folder on the passenger seat, the lights appearing in the mirror. She thought about the calculation she had run in the car, about the steadiness of Branson's hands when he pointed the gun at her, about the sound of the spotlight when it first hit her windows, and the pressure in the air when the helicopter came over the trees. She thought about standing in the parking lot of the sheriff's department at 1 in the morning with Marcus Webb at her shoulder and the whole apparatus of the past 22 years rattling around inside those brick walls about to come down. She thought about Latasha Monroe at the kitchen table at 5:45 in the morning making eggs. She thought about Raymond Caldwell standing in front of a mirror with a navy tie looking at himself. She thought about 8 women in the front row of a federal courtroom who had driven long distances and arranged childcare and taken days off work they couldn't afford because they needed to be in the room where the thing that happened to them was being called what it was. She thought about the word the foreperson had said 18 times and the way the room had felt after the 18th time and the way Latasha had closed her eyes. She looked down at the passenger seat. The manila folder was there. Case number 9-17 Monroe L. Still there. The way it had been there since New Orleans, writing in the same spot, still wearing the label she had written in her own handwriting. Across the front of it, now pressed at a slightly imperfect angle, in the way of things done by human hands in the ordinary course of a working day, was the stamp the clerk's office used to close a file. Case closed. The letters read, definitive, irreversible. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it back on the seat gently, with the care of something that has done what it was made to do, and can now be set down. And she looked at the road. What she felt was not what she had expected to feel, and she had been in this work long enough to know that justice rarely delivers what the word promises. When you hear it said in speeches, the clean, satisfying resolution, the sensation of a thing completed. What it actually felt like was quieter than that, and harder to name, a settling the particular stillness of a frequency that has been running beneath everything for a long time, and has finally stopped, whose absence you identify not as a sound, but as a silence where a sound used to be. She had done her job. Latasha Monroe had been heard. Raymond Caldwell had been given back something that should never have been taken. 8 women had sat in a front row in a federal courthouse and watched the world say out loud in an official proceeding with consequences. What happened to you was real, and it was wrong, and it is accounted for. Highway 31 was tonight just a road, not a trap, not a hunting ground, not the private territory of a man who had decided that a certain kind of driver on a certain kind of night had no one coming for them. Just asphalt and pine trees and the speed limit posted at regular intervals and the center line running clean and straight down the middle where it was always supposed to be. She put the car in drive. She checked the mirrors. She signaled. She pulled back onto the highway with the careful, deliberate compliance of someone who follows the rules, because the rules are worth following not out of fear, but because that is what it means to believe in the thing they represent. Miles Davis kept going unhurried, working through something that took as long as it took. The road opened up ahead of her in the February light, and she pressed the accelerator and felt the engine answer beneath her, and the air came through the open windows, carrying the smell of pine and cool earth, and the particular freshness of a season that has turned, and the pines moved past on both sides in their long rhythm, and the road went forward, the way roads go forward, without end, without apology, into everything that is still ahead. She was going home. The road was clear. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself in it somewhere, or thought of someone you know, or felt something you didn't have a name for, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stories like this one only reach the people who need them when you share them. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next, and drive safe out there.